What if the Illuminati are real? You have probably heard the story in pieces. A secret society running the world. Eye on the dollar bill. Famous faces in dark robes making decisions no one votes on. Most of what you have heard is modern myth layered on top of a much smaller historical truth. So let us start with the truth. On the 1st of May, 1776, a 28-year-old professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt named Adam Weishaupt founded a secret order. He called it the Bund der Perfektibilisten, the League of Perfectibilists. A few months later, he renamed it. The new name, borrowed from the Latin for illuminated, would outlast everything else about the group by 2.5 centuries, the Bavarian Illuminati. Weishaupt was a critic of Jesuit influence over Bavarian education. His goal was to spread rationalist thought, promote the separation of church and state, and build a network of influential men. The model he borrowed was the Freemasons, but the structure was tighter and the secrecy was absolute. Members used code names. Weishaupt himself was Spartacus. By 1782, the order claimed between 2,000 and 3,000 members across the German-speaking lands. The historical record comes mostly from the papers the Bavarian government seized after the recruitment began with what Weishaupt called the Minerval degree, a preliminary stage before the full initiation. A candidate was approached, often through a friend already in the order, and invited to a private dinner where the work of the Enlightenment was the topic of conversation. Nothing was named, nothing was signed. If the man showed interest, he was asked to record a kind of self-portrait, his faults, his ambitions, his secrets, and hand it over. That document became leverage. The order could ruin a man who tried to leave. The internal structure was cell-based, 3 to 5 members per cell, each cell knowing only its own members. Weishaupt had studied the structure carefully and adapted it. Communication passed through a system of couriers and ciphered letters. The cipher itself was substantial, a substitution table that Weishaupt seems to have designed himself, and the Bavarian authorities needed a codebreaker to read the seized papers at all. The man who cracked it, a Jesuit, would later write the first hostile history of the order. By 1783, the order had grown faster than Weishaupt alone could manage, and he brought in a nobleman named Adolph Freiherr von Knigge to handle expansion. Knigge reorganized the degrees, wrote much of the ritual, and recruited aggressively. He also brought in more aristocratic members, which Weishaupt had wanted and which changed the order's center of gravity. The two men quarreled, then split. By 1784, the order was factional, with Weishaupt running his original core from Ingolstadt, and Knigge running a parallel, more ceremonial structure that was closer in style to the Freemasons. The split was a serious weakness. When the state moved against the order a year later, the factions did not coordinate a defense. The trigger was not the Enlightenment philosophy, it was a duel. A member of the order, a man named Jakob Lanz, was stabbed during a sword fight with a non-member named Grumbach. Lanz survived. The state prosecutor, on investigating the duel, found Illuminati documents on Lanz's person. The trail led back to Weishaupt. On the 22nd of June, 1784, the Elector of Bavaria, Karl Theodor, issued a decree banning all secret societies. The decree named no specific group, but it was clearly aimed at the Illuminati. A second decree, in August, named them directly. Weishaupt fled to Gotha, where he was given refuge by Duke Ernest II. The Elector's police raided the homes of known members, the University of Ingolstadt itself, the order's meeting places. The papers they found are the source of nearly everything historians have written about the order's interior life. On the 16th of October, 1787, the Weishaupt papers were published by the order's enemies under the title Einige Originalschriften des Illuminatenordens, or some original writings of the Illuminati order. The book, edited and annotated by the Jesuit codebreaker, was designed to discredit the order. It also, by publishing the internal documents, accidentally preserved the historical record. Without the 1787 publication, we would know almost nothing about the order's actual structure. The order formally dissolved. Many of its members simply went back to their Freemason lodges, since the two organizations had been overlapping for years. The Bavarian state kept the file open until 1790, when it was officially closed. The Illuminati, as a real political organization, ended there. Everything that came next was something else. Within a decade, the Illuminati had become the centerpiece of a much larger conspiracy theory. The author was a French Jesuit named Augustin Barruel, whose 1797 book, Mémoires pour servir à l'histoire du jacobinisme, led out the case. Barruel argued that the French Revolution had not been the work of the French people. It had been engineered, he wrote, by a long-running conspiracy of philosophies, Freemasons, and the Illuminati, working in coordination since the early 1780s to overthrow the monarchy and the church. The book ran to 4 volumes and was widely read across Europe. A Scottish physicist named John Robison published a similar argument in English the same year, under the title Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, Traced Through the Means of Secret Societies. Robison and Barruel agreed on the essentials. They disagreed on details, but the shape of the claim was identical. A small group of philosophers had captured the Masonic lodges, used them to recruit ambitious men, and steered the Enlightenment toward violent revolution. The historical evidence for this is thin. Weishaupt's order was small, mostly Bavarian, mostly short-lived, and was decisively broken by 1787, 2 years before the French Revolution began. The chain of causation that Barruel described cannot be reconstructed from the surviving documents. The Illuminati were simply not large enough, in 1789, to have caused anything. What Barruel and Robison did accomplish, however, was durable. They established a template. From that point forward, every major political upheaval in Europe and America could be, and frequently was, attributed to a secret society of philosophies working in the shadows. The Illuminati became, in a sense that mattered more than the facts, the original conspiracy theory of the modern era. In the early years of the 20th century, a new piece of evidence entered the conspiracy. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a document purporting to record the minutes of a secret meeting of Jewish leaders plotting world domination. The text was serialized in a Russian newspaper in 1903 and published as a book in 1905. It was, as was eventually and conclusively established, a forgery. The actual author was a Russian journalist, an Okhrana agent named Mathieu Golovinski, working under the direction of the Tsarist secret police. The protocols were plagiarized in large part from an earlier French political satire that had nothing to do with Jewish people, and from a dialogue by the German author Hermann Goethe. The forgery was exposed within a few years of publication. The Ford Times in 1920, the London Times in 1921, and a series of academic studies in the 1920s laid out the plagiarism in detail. None of this mattered. The protocols were translated into dozens of languages, distributed by Russian émigré groups in the United States, picked up by Henry Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and used as a recruiting document by the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler quoted them in Mein Kampf. They were taught in Egyptian schools under Gamal Abdel Nasser. They were still in print in parts of the Middle East in the 1990s, with the forger's identity known and documented for the better part of a century. The Illuminati, as a concept, attached itself to the protocols quickly. By the 1920s, the two conspiracy theories had merged in the popular imagination. The Illuminati were the secular philosophies, the Jews were the religious elders, and the protocols were the minutes of their joint meeting. The merger was almost entirely the work of American and European anti-Semites, and it remains, in its original form, a touchstone of white supremacist propaganda. The Vatican formally condemned the protocols as a forgery in 1964. By that point, the merger had been a fixed feature of the conspiracy landscape for 40 years. The most familiar piece of Illuminati iconography in American life is also the most misread. The Eye of Providence, set inside an unfinished pyramid, sits at the top of the Great Seal of the United States, on the back of the $1 bill, and on a great many government documents, currency, and military insignia. The conspiracy reading is straightforward. The eye is the all-seeing eye of the Illuminati. The pyramid is the unfinished work of the New World Order. The 13 steps are the original colonies. The whole thing is a Masonic monument to a secret government. The actual history is more bureaucratic. The seal was designed by a committee appointed by the Continental Congress in 1776 and finalized in 1782. The principal designers were William Barton, a Philadelphia artist, and Charles Thomson, the Secretary of Congress. The eye, in their published explanation, represented the eye of God watching over humanity. The pyramid represented strength and duration. The unfinished top of the pyramid represented the future, which the designers explicitly said was to be filled in by later generations. The Roman numerals MDCCLXXVI on the base are 1776, the year of the Declaration of Independence. None of the designers were Illuminati. Most were not even Masons, although some were. The committee's deliberations, which are preserved in the National Archives, treat the seal as a piece of official iconography with classical and biblical references, not as a coded message to a secret society. The eye had been used in Christian art since the Renaissance. The pyramid was an obvious classical reference in an 18th century design. The bill itself did not carry the seal until 1935, when Franklin D. Roosevelt's Treasury redesigned the currency. The placement of the seal on the back of the dollar, the color choices, the reorientation of the pyramid, all of these are products of the 1935 design, not of the 1782 original. Whatever the Illuminati connection might be, it is not the one most people assume. Between 1969 and 1971,